This happened in the summer of 2010 when I was just entering my teenage years. My family took a trip to a really nice hotel in the city. I can't really remember why we decided to take the trip in the first place, but I remember a lot of family members coming with and staying in adjacent rooms. I've never asked my parents, and it's not really important to the story, but to preface, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat and always have been. I'm a pretty skinny, fragile kid, so I get spooked pretty easily, even now. This, however, was almost definitely not me freaking myself out like I normally did. Looking back, I think I'm incredibly lucky that I trusted my instincts. So this hotel had a really strange design to it. The lobby was actually on the 4th floor and not the bottom floor, which I found strange. To access the lobby, you had to use the elevator. There was no way for you to get to it from the stairs, and this information would have been nice before everything happened, as you'll find out. The hotel was organized in a square shape. Every floor was lined with a balcony, and you could look down into the lobby and the cafe area from your floor. Essentially, if you were walking to your room, you could be seen from anyone that was on your floor if they just stepped out of their room and looked around. I always was afraid that I'd fall over this balcony and sail down 8 stories to my death, but they were high enough to a point where I wasn't too concerned for my safety or anything. So the first day or two was nice. My friends and I just hung out and played cards all day, or we watched whatever was on TV. At night, we'd explore the halls of the hotel and tell each other ghost stories. All in all, it was actually a really fun time, even though I didn't fully understand why we were there. But on the 3rd day, things just got pretty strange quickly. So I woke up to the sound of screaming coming from outside of my door. Now, because of the hotel's design that I mentioned, sounds from the lobby would echo all the way up to the top of the building. So when I walked outside to investigate, I immediately looked over the balcony to see what the commotion was about. And I saw a girl laying on the ground, eggs and milk splattered everywhere around her. People were rushing to help her, and I heard a couple of people telling each other to call 911. It seemed like the girl was unconscious, maybe. Maybe she'd passed out or something. I couldn't quite tell, but I scanned the lobby and saw that my family and a couple of my friends were in the lobby getting breakfast, all staring at the event in front of them. I decided that I'd rush down to meet them to find out what had happened. The elevator was on the opposite side of the floor, so I took the stairwell located right next to my room. We were on the 7th or the 8th floor, so I knew I only had to take about 4 flights down, I think. Not a big deal. I descended for a little while, looking for the number 4 on the wall, or the letter L. I passed floor 5, ready to find a door to the lobby, and it took about 2 more flights of steps before realizing that there hadn't been a door for the 4th floor, nor had there been a door for the 3rd or the 2nd. Now at this point, I probably should have turned back, but I continued down because I was tired and didn't want to climb back up. There were some weird side hallways that went into the pitch black areas that a bunch of piping and wiring were at, and though I was curious to explore, I just kind of passed them by. I quickly hit the bottom floor, a dimly lit and cold room with cinder block walls and concrete floors. In front of me was a set of double doors. I hesitated at first, but I assumed that this was just another way back to the lobby, so I opened them and entered. Behind the door, though, was a massive warehouse-type room, probably the size of a small basketball stadium. The only light that came in was from the stairwell behind me, so I really wasn't able to see too much, but the stairs were stacked and covered in plastic wrap, tables lined the wall, and in the distance I thought that I could see boxes stacked, and lined against the wall as well. It was probably the storage room for the hotel, I reasoned. I looked around and saw an elevator in the back of the room, so I made my way towards it. I closed the door to the stairwell and began to walk in the dim light. But the room was super muggy and dusty, and it seemed like nobody had been down there in a really long time. As I got closer to the elevator, I noticed that it was a little bigger than the elevators in the lobby and the other floors. I pressed the up button, but got no response. There was a card swiper next to the bottom. It must have been for the employees only, I thought. I turned back towards the stairwell doors, making my way past the chairs and the tables along the wall when I got to the door and I gave it a tug. And it was locked, of course. But this is when things started to really hit me. I realized that I was stuck in the dark and dusty basement of a hotel. I didn't have a phone because my parents wouldn't let me get one until I graduated middle school, so I couldn't call anyone. Everyone likely assumed that I was still asleep in the room, so I began to freak out believing that nobody was going to look for me. I searched around the warehouse looking for other ways out. Some of the areas were better lit than others, so I looked around in those areas that I could see first before starting in the darker side of the rooms. There was one other set of doors that I found, but it happened to be locked as well. And it was at this stage that I began to cry, and I was scared that nobody would ever find me in this basement. I swear, too, that it felt like hours, but I think only a handful of minutes passed before I heard the door creak open, and it wasn't the door from the stairwell, though. Rather, it was the second door that I'd found, and a slim middle-aged man in a lab coat came out of the doors. Now, if this was 21-year-old me seeing this man, I would have been very confused as to why this guy was wearing a lab coat in a hotel. I was only 12 or 13 at the time, though, so I immediately was relieved at the sight of an adult who looked smart. So I approached him, tears in my eyes, and he immediately looked surprised to see me, as you'd expect. "Hey, what are you doing down here?" he yelled. I got lost on my way down to the lobby, and I've been locked in here. Do you have a key?" I was shaking, eager to get out of there. He didn't answer my question, and instead he said, "I know a way out of here. Follow me." He began to walk me towards the doors with the stairwell, and I followed, relieved that somebody had finally come to save me. We approached the doors, and I began to reach for the handle, but he continued walking. "Hey, isn't it right here?" I asked him. I'll never forget the look on his face when I said that, too, because he looked nervous, and though it was dim, I could see sweat glistening from his forehead and behind his glasses. "No, this way," he said sternly. I continued to follow him, but I was now nervous myself. He had passed the door to the stairs, and we were now headed toward a darker side of the basement, away from the elevators. He looked like he had no clue where he was leading me to, as he kept checking around him, almost as if he was taking in his surroundings for the first time. We turned a corner, though, and began walking towards the boxes, and it was a dead end. I immediately froze, realizing that something was very, very wrong. This guy had no idea where he was going, nor did he appear to work at the hotel. So I said, my voice shaking, "Okay, where are we going?" He turned and then said, "This way, just follow me." I knew that there were no doors by these boxes. I had checked there first after I found out the stairwell door was locked. And I want to thank whatever God is up there for gifting me with the idea that I had next. I started yelling as loud as I could. I yelled so loud, in fact, that I gave myself a headache after this, and the man, irritated, plugging his ears, began yelling back at me, "What are you doing? Be quiet." I continued to yell, though, and I don't even remember how long I was yelling for, but finally the man snapped and began to quickly walk towards me. I went in a full sprint towards the stairwell doors, hoping to God that they'd somehow be magically open. He didn't run after me. He walked sternly behind me, muttering things like "stupid fucker" and many other kind compliments. I was about 5 feet from the door when somebody burst through. My savior, a hotel janitor who just so happened to hear the screaming from the stairwell. He saw the situation, me and some random guy in a lab coat in a locked basement, and immediately told me to get behind him. The janitor asked me who the man was, and I said that I had no idea, that he had come in through the door on the other side of the room, and I pointed to the door. The janitor quickly radioed into the desk that he had found a child in the basement, and quietly, so that I wouldn't hear, he said, "This man came from outside, get security," or something like that. The man in the lab coat started trying to argue with the janitor, claiming that he simply was looking for a bathroom. The janitor clearly wasn't buying it, though, and kept saying things like, "Yeah, wait till security gets here and you can talk to them about it." I was standing beside him the whole time, trying to take in what was happening, confused out of my mind. Eventually, though, an employee from the front desk arrived and took me back up the steps to the lobby where I met with my family, who surprisingly had no idea that I was even missing. I told them the story, crying and shaking, and they hugged me tightly, thanking the employee over and over for their help. I never did get to thank that janitor, though, which is a bit of a shame. Looking back now, though, I have absolutely no clue what that man was doing in that basement. I don't have any information as to what happened afterwards or who he was. I know for a fact that the incident with the girl in the lobby was unrelated, something about low blood sugar. I'm not sure, but I've thought about that day a lot, and the only explanation that I can put together is that the door that I'd found in the basement led to the streets of the city, where he must have wandered in from or something. I have no clue what his intentions were, why he was wearing a lab coat of all things, or why he chose to pretend to know a way out like he did. To be frank, I suppose this could have just been a huge misunderstanding of some sort, and I just chose a really bad time to get lost, but all I know for sure is that if I hadn't have screamed my lungs out like I did, I may not have been telling the story the same way, or even at all. So I was in a lonely and quite vulnerable time within my life back then. I was looking for a good time and just wanted to be with someone. I was a bit shaken up for maybe a week after it happened, but I eventually got over it and I moved on with my life. So there was this young and really attractive dude, or so I thought, whose profile I came across. I was about 20 at the time. We spoke and we exchanged pics and messages. We planned to meet up and he gave me his address, and later in the day, I took an Uber to that address. I was standing around for hours. It was really dark and was getting late in the night. I had previously knocked on the door of the address and then resorted to standing around near the address to see if I'd get a message or response or anything, but I didn't get anything. I sent him so many messages with no responses, and quite honestly, I was really disappointed, but I didn't give him trouble about it. I was more so disappointed about the wasted Uber money than I was with him, because it wasn't exactly the cheapest ride there and back. The next day, though, on the dating app that I was using, he sent me stories about something happening with someone in his family. I don't exactly remember it, but thinking back, I can't believe I actually believed him when he told me. I felt just so stupid. But that same day, as we were talking, all was forgiven, and we just chalk it up to sometimes bad stuff happens, and we planned to meet up again at a much earlier time this time. So I came to the same address, and as I'm knocking on the door, I don't get a response, and I look around. But this time, I see an old man sitting in a black car across the street from the house, and he's just kind of staring at me. The creepy thing, though, was that he was staring as if I was candy or something, that he just couldn't resist, and he just had to have me. I waited around a bit longer. The old man is still there just staring at me, and I get a little bit uncomfortable and kind of worried too. And that was when it hit me. He was that young and really attractive dude that I'd been talking to this entire time. I didn't know what to do upon the realization, but I wasn't going to confront him or anything. I just remember being really angry, followed by sadness, and I got an Uber to go back. I blocked him on the app after sending him a nasty message. I don't know if he saw it or not before I blocked him, but I didn't care. But he didn't stop there, because he followed the Uber that I was in. I kept a watchful eye out for his car, and I was pretty damn terrified, but was relieved that he ended up losing us on the highway. I never did see him again after that, but I'll never forget the disgusting and snarky look that he had on his face as he was kind of staring at me, just seemingly so proud of what he did. I couldn't think straight for a solid week after that. The wasted money, the emotional trauma, and just the pure anger. I learned an important lesson about being safer on dating apps after that, and teaching myself that sometimes we're just vulnerable and we shouldn't get so caught up in that. Working as a second grade teacher, it's not unusual to hear some bizarre stuff. But after a while, you just pretty much learn to go with it. But throughout my career, there was really only one student, though, that made me rethink teaching at one point. I won't use his real name for privacy reasons, obviously, so I'll just call him Billy. So Billy was just your average second grader. I never really had problems with him. Maybe he'd get up and wander around or shout out in class sometimes, but tons of students had little issues here and there like that. But then one day, I noticed that he was acting a little different than usual. It was raining pretty heavy that day, and I recall it being pretty dark and gloomy. I had the class pair up in groups for a project, and that's when I saw Billy was still sitting at his table just drawing on some paper. I knew that he had friends in class, so it couldn't be that he didn't have anybody to work with. So I stopped by his desk and told him that it was time to participate in our group project. And without even looking at me, he just said, "No thanks, I'm supposed to finish my drawing." I watched him draw for a moment, but honestly, it didn't look like he was really creating anything. Just coloured shapes and random doodling, so I told him that this wasn't part of any assignment today and he could finish it during his free time. But then he looked at me and said, "Well, my teacher said that I have to finish it right now." I was taken aback a bit, not entirely sure what he was talking about. I looked around the class. All the other students were still pairing up, so I sat next to Billy and gently told him that I was his teacher, but I never said that he had to finish this drawing or anything. And almost instantly he replied back, saying that I wasn't his teacher anymore, that Mr. Shadow was. Now, as a teacher, I could have went along with this story, but I didn't want him to think that this idea was okay, especially in class. So I told him that there was no Mr. Shadow at this school. And then Billy looked at me in a way that I've never seen him look, almost as if he was scared and angry at the same time. Then he softly whispered to me, "Mr. Shadow is real." The way he said it, he made it seem so real. Still looking at him, I asked him where Mr. Shadow was. He sunk down in his chair and his eyes moved towards the floor. And then he whispered out that he was standing behind you. In that moment, I honestly felt the hairs on the back of my neck raise up, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. As I stood up from Billy's desk, I started to tell him that I didn't see a Mr. Shadow. Then Billy quickly covered his eyes with his hands. And that's when I noticed that the rest of the classroom was extremely quiet. So I turned around to face them, and all the other students were backed up against the chalkboard, and they all looked terrified as if they'd just seen a ghost. To this day, it's been the most unexplainable thing that I've ever seen. So one night, maybe almost a year ago now, I was waiting for my boyfriend outside of the liquor store. I was waiting in the car, and it was pretty much dark outside. This girl comes up to the car, and I hear her say, "Angela." It caught me off guard, as I couldn't really see her, so I don't know how she recognized me. But anyway, I opened the door slightly because, well, I thought maybe she was somebody that I knew. But when I did, I didn't recognize her at all. She made casual conversation with me, small talk, seemed fairly normal. I was very confused, obviously, but thought maybe it was someone that I'd met at a party that I just didn't remember. About a week later, I got a bunch of weird messages on Instagram, though. They made no sense whatsoever. She sounded either tweaked out or like a paranoid schizophrenic or something. I went to the profile and looked at the pics, and it was that same girl. She was typing nonsense, and I mean literal nonsense, paranoid delusional thoughts that made no sense whatsoever. So I brushed it off, because whatever, right? But I'll admit that I was still weirded out. Anyway, a few months later, I see her in line at my work. I have no idea how she knew where I worked. I mean, I work at a restaurant similar to Chipotle, and I was at the start of where people order and whatnot. And when she got to the front of the line, she said, "Hey, what time are you off?" And I said, "Later," and didn't give her an exact time, obviously. She said okay to this, and then just walked away. Didn't order anything or say anything else, so I knew then that she was there to see me. Once again, though, I really don't know how she knew that I worked there because, I don't put my work on social media or anything. After this encounter, though, I went on my break to check my phone and I'd received an Instagram message from her. She was saying things like, I was going to beat your ass and all of this threatening, delusional stuff. I told my manager and he said that he would walk me to my Uber at the end of the night, which he did. After this, I blocked the Instagram account, didn't hear from her for a while at least, until a few months ago when I saw in a police report from my city that she had been arrested for attempted murder. She had attempted to push 2 high school cross-country runners over a bridge. It's a bridge very close to my house that I often cross while walking home from work, and it really freaked me out. Since she had a slight obsession with me, I thought, wow, what if that had been me walking that bridge, since I take that route so much? Luckily, the kids fought her off, and she was arrested and booked on attempted murder. I don't know how long she's going to be in for. This is California, and I don't know how much sentencing when it comes to stuff like that is, but anyway, she's in jail for now, and I sure hope that I don't see her in the future again. So, I've never really told anyone this story because, I don't think anyone's going to believe me. To be honest, too, I don't even know if I believe myself. I was about 11 or 12 in 2002, and I came home from school at 2:30 and stayed alone until my parents got home from work a few hours later. My dad around 4:30 and my mum about 6. On this particular afternoon, I came into the garage, walked around the corner to the foyer where our stairs were to go up to my room. In the foyer, we had this sort of cabinet thing that was really old and had a little shelf on the front of it. As I pass it, I notice a pair of gloves sitting on the shelf. Very heavy fur gloves that you'd imagine someone wearing in the winter in the 1800s or something, like gloves out of The Revenant. I'd never seen them before, obviously, in my life, and it was also summertime, so it just made no sense that they would be there. But then, all of a sudden, I heard a distinct deep cough upstairs. I was paralyzed with fear at this point. I have no idea why I didn't run as I just quietly sat and listened at the kitchen table, but I could hear footsteps of someone quite heavily walking around above me, and these weren't just sounds of the house settling. This definitely was someone walking around up there. Anyway, my logic at the time was that it was an intruder, and if I didn't put up a fight, they would just leave without hurting me once they came down and got their weird gloves. But I sat there for quite some time and no one ever came down. After what seemed like days, my dad gets home from work and I immediately tell him everything and to come look at the gloves and check upstairs. And, to my disbelief, the gloves are just gone. My dad checks everywhere upstairs and there's nothing missing. No sign of anyone there and no sign of forced entry anywhere, and my dad has always been extremely thorough about home security, so there's no way that there was an unlocked door or window. Basically, he thought that I was just making stuff up, and after that, I just never mentioned it again. I've not had any other experiences like that ever since then, and I generally believe that most everything can be explained. The only thing I can think of for this, though, was that it was a dream, but I'm 99% sure that it wasn't. And when I asked my dad recently, he said that he remembers coming home to me freaking out about some gloves and a man upstairs. So, it definitely happened.